Good morning, Dr. Henry. It is so wonderful to chat with you this morning and to celebrate your birthday. And I think I have to say a little bit of a happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. So how does it feel to be turning 80 this morning? Well, you're not turning 80 this morning, but turning 80 the next few weeks or so. How does that feel? How you feel now in terms of being this giant of knowledge and getting to this stage in your life? What are the feelings that are coming to you?
It feels good, to be around. I thank God that I am around, and so many of my colleagues have gone ahead of me.
Yes.
So that I'm indeed very privileged to be around and to be in reasonably good health.
Right.
Yeah,
That is so important to give thanks about that.
Yes.
So you would say,
and to have the faculties with me still.
very, very important. Very important. So what would you say, as you are now looking back on this illustrious career that you've had over the years, what you would say motivated you in the first place to kind of get into this work and to start in this field of academics?
Well, my entry into economics came just as my interest in economics came just as about the time I was leaving high school. In 1961, the country was preparing for some kind of independence, at least for federation. And, in the build-up to that, you had on the radio Dr. Williams and a number of technocrats talking about development, about economics and so on. And at A-levels, I had done Latin, French, and Spanish, and anticipated that I'd go on to do languages and teach, maybe teach French or Spanish. French was my favorite subject. But you got wind of change taking place in the country, and people talking about serious issues about development, about economics and transformation and so on. Willie Dimas, Bassotti, Rampasad, and of course, Eric Williams himself.
Right.
And I started to wonder, this field of economics looked like it would be quite interesting.
Right.
So as I left school, having got A-levels in Latin, French, and Spanish, I decided I'd do economics up to the A-levels, and I signed up for a Wolsey Hall course. Then, lo and behold, 2 years after, the government promoted, contributed to the establishment of the College of Arts and Science at UWI, and economics was being offered, and I got into economics. Having got into economics, and I did sociology in my first degree, I started to understand a lot more about the society, a lot more about myself, actually. And, in sociology and in some of the courses that we did then, I got exposed to West Indian history, which, you had peripherally understood well. Slaves were brought here, indentured servants were brought here. There was Sir Francis Drake and Walter Raleigh and all these other guys that you had read about at primary school. My history course at high school was largely on British and European history. And there was some sense that, well, maybe West Indian history was not really a subject of any importance.
Right, yes.
So my first years at university really opened my eyes about my space in which I had grown up, and the direction in which it might be going.
So
how could I contribute to its going in a direction in which people like me, a black boy from Arima, could feel that you can achieve your full potential in this new society.
And I want to jump off of that last statement that you made there, because you talked initially when we started the conversation, you talked about finding yourself and this journey with an understanding of West Indian history, which was so different to, of course, colonial history and European history. That finding of self, I feel as if a lot of your work has been setting the foundation for future generations to find themselves, right? And so maybe you could elaborate a little bit more about that drive to contribute to the society with academic work that is enriching people of a black heritage, and how that impacts young people today.
Well, reading about slavery and that journey,
yes,
that we were brought on, and how we were treated,
middle passage,
and how we were, our culture and so on, we were robbed of our culture, devastated actually in the experience, prompted me over time to decide that, look, if Columbus were to come back now, what would we show him in this society that would surprise him?
Right.
Because we were simply, to be used as labor,
right,
as free labor. That's how we were seen. Mm-hmm. And really, that experience lasted, one could say, for 500 years.
Essentially, yeah.
All right. So Columbus had slaves when the slaves were bought very early because they felt to be more capable of dealing with conditions of enslavement and working for their masters than the first people, right, who committed suicide rather than being enslaved.
Right, right.
So my task was really to work in this place that we are here. I remember Eric Williams saying that there's no Mother India, there's no Mother Africa. Yeah, we are here now.
Right, right.
And how do we build this place that where we are the equal of anybody, everywhere, anywhere in the world, in this space? So in teaching is how do I transmit that sense of capacity in each individual, that you can see that in what you do, you can contribute, have a good life, and to create a platform for those who would follow after you. Because, there's this notion that slaves African people had no history before slavery. Mm-hmm. And of course, that was debunked when you understood the ancient Egyptians and the civilizations that existed in Africa. And, well, they did not have gunpowder, they did not have the artifacts for war. And this led, of course, to their being overpowered by Europeans. Right. But it could have been different. And absolutely. You also understood, too, that in terms of world history, the Chinese might have been far more advanced than the Europeans, but they had this notion of not wanting to have truck with barbarians, people. So this notion of the wall to keep barbarians out. Right. You don't really want to have right? But if they had similar notions as the Europeans, they would have come west. Right. And colonized the West, and maybe us too. Yeah. Right? And then our notions of beauty and all that would have been determined by different, right? Yeah. It's so interesting, this notion of who is barbaric and who is uncivilized, right? And how that evolved our history in this part of the world. So I want to shift course a little bit and talk about, as you mentioned, this idea of who we are as a people and knowing and understanding our history. And of course, that is going to dictate where we go. But you've done so much work with government,
in various different boards, whether it's working at Carreri, it's the Minimum Wages Board, it's the National Productivity Council, all of this stuff to kind of, you know, help shape a region with the kinds of systems and institutions that you think, you know, a country on its path to development will be on. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that kind of pseudo government work that you have done over the years to not just shape young people, but to shape institutions so that we will have the kind of society that you think we need to go in the right direction.
All right. Well, before becoming an academic, I worked in the public service and I worked in the Ministry of Education. And one of the things that, one of the important, it was during the period when the 15-year educational plan was being developed, and I was the economist statistician working in the Ministry of Education. And what I really, you know, got into was ensuring that the vast majority of people had access to secondary education. That was the objective of the government then, and it's something that I could commit to, because I had, by the time I started working in government, I had reviewed the experience of Cuba in the Castro Revolution. And one of the objectives of Castro was to eliminate adult literacy in Cuba. And they were quite successful. And I felt, you know, the program that the government was embarked on here was going to democratize secondary education. Because for people like myself and, you know, those with whom I had grown up, I didn't see myself as quote unquote brighter than they. And felt if they had the opportunity, like myself, they could achieve and complete secondary education. It's something that I've believed in all my life, and you know that it is indeed a little worrying to see what has happened in Trinidad and Tobago and also in the Caribbean, that we have universalized secondary education, but we have not really ensured that the vast majority of children get a good education.
Good education.
And recognize in going into secondary school is just as in primary school. You're expected to follow a primary school program and to complete it. And likewise, you are doing secondary, you're at secondary school and you're supposed to do the program and complete it. And the challenge today is that completing secondary education today is not getting just 5 subjects.
Yes.
You know, and we have to get that across to large numbers of people, because subsequently I was to discover that in the context of the Caribbean, is the best way of looking at our development challenge is to recognize that we are into what I call the economics of rocks.
The economics of rocks.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
You know, the girl was very dismissive of the Caribbean and said, you know, the specks of dust or something like that, you know. Yeah, all right, fine. They brought us and put us on these specks of dust. But we could create enormous capacity. We can transform our space. We can grow these economies once we recognize that the capacity to do that is about what is in the heads of our people.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. This idea of national strength coming out of not just industrial wealth, not just economic wealth, but, you know, intellectual potential and what we can achieve as a people from what our mental capacity is, essentially.
Yes.
And as disappointing as you may think this situation is now in terms of what our levels of completion, I still think the Caribbean is so far ahead of some other developing nations in terms, and I think that those initial investments in education, particularly in Trinidad and Tobago, has really set us apart and really allowed us to develop in positive ways. So I think there's still hope for us and for people.
There's hope,
yeah.
But we have to change gears actually, because in the case of Trinidad, 30 to 40% of the workforce does not have completed secondary education.
Yeah.
All right. And therefore, we need to institutionalize this notion of lifelong education and training. And whatever you might have achieved in secondary school, or if you didn't achieve anything in secondary school or didn't go to secondary school, we have to have programs in place that allow you to start from wherever you have reached and keep growing and learning. Because having regard to the fact that life expectancy is increasing, notwithstanding some of the challenges that we have in Trinidad now with crime and so on, life expectancy is actually increasing. And therefore, people are likely to live close to my age. And governments will find it necessary, as they're admitting, that you have to raise the retirement age, as you see what has happened in France.
Yes.
And just to raise it by 2 years. But technically, places like France and clearly in the Caribbean, we have to raise the retirement age maybe more like to 70.
Yeah.
So it means that you're going to be in the workforce for a long time.
Right.
And long enough for you to educate and upgrade yourself such that you can bring a higher level of talent and capacity to the world of work.
Right. Now, you talk about this idea of, intellectual contribution and the entire population and where we're going. And perhaps you can speak a little bit to where you think the tremendous amount of potential is in terms of industrial growth, in terms of national development. Where do you see the future of Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean as we talk about economic growth and economic development?
Well, we have to talk about both Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean.
Yes.
Because I go right back to Lewis and Williams, who were both, notwithstanding his arithmetic of 1 from 10 leaves 0.
Right.
Williams was indeed a regionalist.
Yes.
As was Arthur Lewis. And I cite them as the 2 luminaries of the early 20th century. Right. One born in 1911, the other born in 1915. And when you think of the time when they were born and what the Caribbean was then, to think of a unified Caribbean, yes, English-speaking Caribbean, and to think of a Caribbean that is industrialized, a Caribbean where the economies are organized for the people of the countries rather than plantation economies that have been organized to produce for the metropolitan controller, metropolitan, Britain. That's what we were here for. That's what we were brought here for. So it means getting independence and transforming the country so that you have an economy to create jobs, to create possibilities for the people living in the space rather than to produce for the metropole.
Somebody else.
Yeah. So that has been the challenge, and unfortunately it remains a challenge, and we have not really advanced as far as I think we ought to have done. All right. And you hear governments talk about diversification, including the one here in Trinidad, diversification. But what diversification means is not really understood. It means it does not mean moving from one kind of activity into another activity, moving from, sugar and banana production to tourism.
Right. Yeah.
It means moving into a whole range of different activities. A whole range of different activities, even activities that people who are in the Twin Towers and engage in planning in Trinidad and Tobago or in Jampro in Jamaica might not even understand. It means that you have to get the entire population understanding that we are world citizens and they are producing for the domestic economy, but also for an international economy out there, because these countries, Lloyd Best and others have, and Dimas and others have emphasized to us that as small countries, there are limits. Even in Lloyd Best's model, he talks about that we have the Maroons had part of the answer because they looked around and found capacity to feed oneself from the resources available. Right? So the Aki bias, that Aki is something dangerous if you don't know when to pick it, but if you know how to use it, it's
amazing.
Yes, but we have a swordfish bias that we had to bring something in, because
Right.
in the plantation they still had to get
something
some
foreign to make it authentic.
Yes. So they had to get the cheapest source of protein, which was salted cod from Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. All right. Mm-hmm. So we have a swordfish bias, but it reflects the fact that you look around at the material culture of everywhere in the Caribbean, that we need things that we just can't produce for ourselves. And in order to have those things, we have to export. But we cannot depend on tourism alone or on oil and gas alone. And we see now that all of these are quite fickle. Right. We have to have a range of things, goods and services. And it means that large numbers of people, and not only the so-called elite, have the ideas. And when I talk to the young people, I tell them, all right, go and look at the world, the population clock. And when we finish this interview, you go and look at it. And you see children are being born all the time.
Constantly.
Yeah, all right. So they're born in Seoul in South Korea. They're born in Port of Spain General, San Fernando General, Kingston General, wherever children are being born. Who is brighter?
Correct.
So everybody, we're more or less of average ability. And it's what in our societies, what we do between age, when the baby is born, and what we do, how we create an adult. Right. 15, 18, 20, 25 years on. Whether we've done the job well, such that that young person knows that he is a world citizen and has to earn and create possibilities for him or herself, producing in the domestic economy, for the domestic economy, but also producing some of it that we might be able to export abroad that competitively across a wide swathe. So it means that a lot more of us will need to be in the export business.
And that's the thing, this idea of kind of small business and people not looking to this foreign entity for employment, for idea generation. And one of the challenges I found, like most of my work is in the tourism industry. And I find even in the tourism industry, where it's the largest, employer, and there's so much opportunity for entrepreneurship, even in that space, we look to these foreign entities. And then by extension, so much of that money leaves the country, right? There's so much of that money now not staying, not circulating in the economy. It's just, we have so much movement out of, so much repatriation of any funds that we get invested. And I wonder, I think you talk about this kind of swordfish bias. If we are moving towards a space where young people today are looking internally for solutions as opposed to externally for employment opportunities, for business ideas and so forth, and how can we as a country, whether it's through education or through economic development programs, move out of this mindset that somebody else must cater to or facilitate our success as opposed to our own. And I think your generation came out of this mindset that we are self-made people. And I wonder if we're moving away from that a little bit today, if you think so.
Yes, and to some extent, my generation has been responsible for that continued notion that we have to depend on somebody coming in from outside. You know, it's kind of the assumption of a continuation.
Mm-hmm.
It's a continuation of the idea that there must be somebody from outside who must see us here and say, well, there's an opportunity to come in and use us in this space and make plenty of money. And if they think they'll go back to somewhere else, you know, it means that to some extent, even some of our technocrats in their approach to foreign investment, it reflects that colonial mentality that you have to organize the population so that people can come in from outside and use us in this space, rather than cultivating this notion that look in the mirror and you'd see somebody who has as much capacity as the others who were born in, you know, Tokyo General and and Helsinki General, New York General, you know, when you were born, and say, all right, I am going to do something in this space. I may need assistance from foreigners. So when they come in, they are coming in on terms and conditions that I recognize that I might need to give them to further my advancement.
Right.
And you know, that's the difference between what has happened. You know, C.Y. Thomas, distinguished economist, wrote a book, Dependence on Transformation, and I criticized the notion that he had of what was happening in Asia, because he suggested that Lewis was, you know, when you go back and read Lewis said, well, the foreigners might come in, but all people learn the tricks of the trade. The Asians, yes, they went into foreign capital, went into East Asia, you know, and seemed to exploit the cheap labor. But I argue that the Asians perform jujitsu. So when you were riding their backs,
right,
they were finding a way to put a leg over your back.
Right, they were understanding your strategy so that they could
exactly, and the engineering and all of that, so that you find today China is the factory of the world, and there are others, you know, the Vietnam, you know, South Korea, and they have now produced products that are competitive in the world.
Yeah, and that are bettering the ones that we are producing. Yeah.
So there's Apple from, you know, iPhones from the United States. You think Apple can look across at Samsung and look down?
No, they cannot. No, they cannot.
And which British phone, which phone did the British produce? And there was Nokia and BlackBerry. They are no longer.
They are no longer.
Right? So it's a different approach. And surely foreign capital would have gone into South Korea, etc. But look today, what we see, you have Kia cars and Hyundai cars and LG white goods and so on. And it's the Americans who invented electronics and so on. All right.
Right.
So it's a different mindset, and this is the problem that we have in the Caribbean. We have to cultivate that mindset across a large number of people, and it goes beyond the people who we feel are the the conglomerates, and those are the ones who will transform the economy. No.
So I'm a professor at a university in the States. You have been a professor in the Caribbean at UE and made just tremendous bodies of work. But for me, there's always been kind of a fundamental difference in how we approach education in the Caribbean versus per se how they approach it in the US, for example. And I often say the US education system is a average Joe education system, right? So average Joe can do well here, get a degree, be successful. Whereas I have often found in the Caribbean, we are so centered on our elitist education that the creme de la creme of the Caribbean comes to the US and just breeze through the system. But is it a system that in the end works for everybody? Can we continue to survive with this elitist approach to education moving forward?
No, we won't, because there's something called the bell-shaped curve. And maybe 2 or 3% of any cohort would have the capacity of Einstein.
Yes, right.
Right? And there are 2 or 3% of the population who would be born with Down syndrome and would have learning disabilities. But in metropolitan countries, I understand that some of them do go to university.
Yes, this is true. I have,
right.
many folks at my university, yeah.
So that most of us are indeed average.
Correct.
And it's whether you have systems that allow average people to reach the zenith of their capacity.
Pinnacle
right?
of
And therefore, and to take that into the workplace.
And
the other thing too, and this comes back to the whole issue of lifelong education and training, that technology is changing, the knowledge is exploding, and what you need in the workplace today is people who keep abreast. If I depended only on what I did at undergraduate and graduate school, I'd be hopelessly irrelevant.
Hopelessly irrelevant. I cannot imagine you being hopelessly irrelevant at any point, Dr. Henry. You are the antithesis of that idea. So, we've been, and that makes such a good point, this idea of seeking out the potential of the majority as opposed to the minority, right? And I think we exalt and we celebrate the minority as this big thing without understanding the vast difference in our society when the majority has these opportunities. And I think India is figuring that out slowly but surely, right? With understanding how the caste system has not allowed the potential of India to be realized and so forth and so on.
Let me make a quick point. I haven't checked it, but I suspect that Einstein did not write any textbook. All right. So it's average people who write textbooks.
Right.
And in textbooks, what happens is that the received knowledge is being put, we received, whatever is the existing state of knowledge is put in textbooks. So what you have to do is to ensure that students who are going through the school system receive the existing information. And it's very ordinary people who run the world.
Right. That is true. That is true.
So you equip everybody, and of course some would shine in some areas and they might not shine in other areas. We know that some subjects you like, some subjects you won't like, and so on. So, but you get everybody at least to have, you know, average, and in trying to get them to at least have average, some of them would shine and might actually be closer to Einstein than you would have recognized from before. But at least they can get up to the high level performance.
And what I think is that part of the challenge is this idea of people setting down a path to determine their life at 11, right? At 12 is just an insane concept. And that's another thing that you see in other societies that I really think in the Caribbean, we have to work harder on this notion of, as I develop through my life, what are the opportunities for continuous learning and development? What are the opportunities for me to take big steps, big jumps that didn't occur at 11 because I wasn't in the mindset as yet, or I didn't reach my full potential. So where can I now come back at 18 and say, oh, here's an opportunity to correct this path at 25, at 35, at 45, at 50, at 80, right? Where are those opportunities?
Yeah, before talking about the opportunities, as you mentioned this thing about people being written off at age 11. It's so unfortunate because they didn't get to go. I like to tell people that St. Mary's, QRC, etc., they could only receive 120 or so students. All right. When you check the exam, well, you'll find that many students actually come close to the top student.
Right, the grade.
Right. So when you have 120 students and you have, let's say the highest mark is 95. When you get down to 90, you might find that there are 15 students who passed, but you have filled the school and you have only 8 places. So 8 of the 15 would get in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And 7 would be of the view that they didn't get their first choice,
right,
and they're written off. I know of, in fact, a colleague who didn't get to go to the high school, and he still carries that chip on his shoulder.
No, I know.
Yeah,
yes.
but I've also had the experience of seeing people who were at primary school with me, didn't go to high school, got a school leaving certificate. In one particular case, the guy ended up as what one might call a go-for caddy boy at Centennial, and then he got exposed with, there's science and all these things. And he started doing a secondary school program, after work. Mm-hmm. Got subject here, subject there, subject.
Right.
And I went into university 2 years after leaving high school, and he went into university at the same time as I did.
There you go.
And today he has a PhD.
And there you go. And this is my point. This is my point. Mm-hmm. So, we're coming to the end of our hour, but I really want to end on just this high note, because one of the things we talked about before, you and I, is the legacy of QRC. So we talk about our decision, our life being determined at 11. But when you entered, you talked to me about entering QRC, and I always joke with friends from my alma mater, Bishops, about the QRC man and the QRC mindset and persona. And if you could talk today, which I'm sure you often do, to young QRC boys, young folks who are now at the beginning of their lives or their career, what would be some sage advice that you would give to them today?
Well, Try to master every subject, including the subjects that you don't like. Try to master the subject, every subject, including those that you don't like. Because in this world of the 21st century, you have to have a large toolbox. Look at what has happened with Chat GPT. All of a sudden, it's going to transform education and the delivery of education, because we now have, I teach a course part-time at UE, and we got some exposure to the impact of AI, and I'm saying to myself, I cannot depend on a student's essay to establish his or her capacity, whether they've received the information. We would now have to resort to oral examinations. All right. But the point about it is, though, however, is that the young people, you have to make sure you have a good foundation by trying to do well in as many subjects as possible. Don't think of 5 subjects, but think of 8, 10, if you feel you can master it. And enjoy the experience. All right. And learning is, of course, sometimes our teachers don't make it pleasurable. But there's so much that is available online, etc., that can actually make it pleasurable. And I always quote Sesame Street, the children are told, when I was growing up, you were told, go and pick up your book. But on Sesame Street, well, you learn all kinds of things without picking up your book. You learn, to me, you learn physics. The count on Sesame Street teaches you about acceleration and differentiation, almost, counting slowly getting faster. That is represented by a curve, that you can see the rate of change. So by the time you get to that in physics, you already understand rates of change. So get yourself, do well in school and enjoy school. There's a lot of sport and other kinds of activities that cultivate a certain kind of capacity, which I had at QRC, I never made it to the cricket team. I never made it to the athletics team, but my first exposure came there, and I passed sometimes on that field, and I think of the enjoyment that I had there. And many of our schools have a lot of facilities. Enjoy those facilities while you're there. Get involved in debating societies and in other kinds of activities that good schools should have. And all schools should be good schools. And all schools should be first choice schools, because they're taking everybody, the average, and getting all of us up to the average and better. All schools should have that as their objective. And unfortunately, we don't have it in Trinidad, and we don't have it in a number of other countries in the Caribbean, so that we see kind of wastage, really. People going to school and coming out without, the wherewithal.
Yeah, and as we talk about what we can expect from students and what advice you want to give students, I think for me also, similar to you, starting off my career in education, being a high school teacher, elementary school teacher, and now being a professor, you starting off in the Ministry of Education and working your way up and being a professor. I think I want to ask you, what is your advice for teachers as well? Because teachers play such an important role in harnessing that creativity and helping folks to think outside of that box, outside of that traditional way of seeking education. And so what is the sage advice you have for the next generation of teachers so that they can inspire students in interesting and creative ways?
Yes, I know it's a challenge because of, social dynamics outside of the school system that sometimes creates an environment where the children are not really, committed, all right? But teachers have to see that as their challenge. How do you make the work interesting such that most will want to get involved, to do the work? And children are different. And of course, you have 30 or so children, and it's a challenge. But you have to find a way. So the teacher has to be actually very inventive and creative. I spent more time teaching at the tertiary level than surely at the secondary level. But I used to give jokes and so on about all kinds of things so that people got it. And one case, it has to do with the problem that we have in Caribbean agriculture. Our Caribbean agriculture still is not geared to satisfy our food needs, or are not geared to satisfy our food needs to the extent necessary. And a lot of the problem has to do with our taste patterns. And I make a joke about it and tell people that if Adam, I make the connection between pom, which is apple, and pomerac, which is a fruit that we have, and it might have another name in the Eastern Caribbean as well.
Right. I was just
or golden apple.
Some parts of the Caribbean, they call it apple in different, they call it different types of apple. Yeah, you're right.
If Adam and Eve were to come back and they look around, they see red apples, green apples, all kinds of apples. And Adam will be asking Eve, is it the same thing that we had in the Garden of Eden? And they'll be quizzically, they're not sure. But when they see pomerac or they see golden apple, because the other societies have spent the time adapting apple for different conditions. We have not done the work. So that pomerac and golden apple come into Port of Spain or elsewhere, and pom apple could look across at pomerac and say, but where are you from? From Toko, 50 miles from the road. Right. But I've traveled 1,000 miles and look at me, I'm smiling. And pomerac is, as we say in Trinidad, looking cargo, bruised, all right? And therefore, the people coming out, they're not interested in pomerac, they'll buy pom.
Right.
So that's the balance of payments there. So we're dependent on foreign imports. And our taste patterns have been shaped by foreign goods. And we don't see the possibility of, the technical work being done on pomerac and golden apple, etc., so that you have pomerac orchards and golden apple orchards and breadfruit orchards and so on. You don't have those such orchards. So now that because of COVID, we realized, we should be doing more to produce for the region, for the domestic market and for the region.
To be self-sufficient.
Yes, but we haven't done the work so that people start realizing, this is what it comes down to. So, and in fact, somebody met me the other day and said, you remember pom and pomerac, apple and pomerac. And this is a guy who I would have thought he's now a judge in the Supreme Court or whatever.
Oh.
You remember that example? So that
remember the pom and pomerac example.
Yeah. So when you talk about diversification and technology and so on, is application of technology too. the development of orchards, of pomerac and pomme cité and all the other food that we could produce and can supply us better in terms of our health requirements, health and food needs in the Caribbean than the things that we import.
And you know, it's so unfortunate because so much of our palate has been driven by these external goods and, you know, and services. And yet when I am in the States, people crave mango ice cream. The number one ice cream in the Caribbean is strawberry and vanilla and chocolate. And yet people are paying good money for guava ice cream and mango ice cream and pineapple ice cream and coconut ice cream. And so you wonder, you know, how is this sensible? How are people in other parts of the world craving what we have in our backyard and we have no interest in
I have a joke on that. Yeah, there's an advertisement, I think it's a raccoon, the two raccoons, and you know, and they're talking about mango. And I'm saying to myself, you know something? Because of the demand for mango in the metropole, they will take mango, which is a tropical fruit, and make it temperate. And next thing you know, we might be importing mango.
We sure, and we might start liking it then. Yes.
And South Carolina.
Yes, we might start liking it then. Well, Dr. Henry, it has been such a joy chatting with you and celebrating with you all of the milestones of your career and just listening to your sage advice. And I am just so honored that you allowed me this time to get to know you better and to kind of look back on where we were and where we've come to and hopefully where we are going. And I just really enjoyed you spending the time with me today.
That'd be my pleasure.
Thank you. So my name is Sacha Joseph-Mathews. I'm a business professor in University Pacific in California, and I have been chatting with Dr. Ralph Henry. Doc, it's been a joy. So you enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great one.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.